Hello, dreamer. Tonight, let me guide you into a realm of ancient magic and quiet wonder. Imagine a silver-haired princess standing on the brink of destiny, drawn into the heart of a mystical forest where secrets of the veil await. This is a story of courage, balance, and the unbreakable bond between worlds. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and feel the calm of the night settle over you. Let the whispers of the trees and the glow of the twin moons carry you into a peaceful slumber. Rest now, and let the tale begin. The rain hammered against the high stone walls of St. Gerwain's monastery, a relentless percussion that drowned out all sound but the howling wind. Sir Alaric, drenched and weary from his journey, guided his steed to the gates. A narrow slat opened, revealing a pair of suspicious eyes. "Sanctuary," Alaric called, his voice hoarse. The gates groaned open, and he entered. Inside, the air was damp and thick with the scent of wax and mildew. The monks, cloaked in simple brown robes, moved like shadows through the flickering torchlight. Alaric was ushered into a modest chamber where he was offered bread and watered ale. The storm raged on, but Alaric's mind churned louder. His mission for the king had taken him farther than most dared to travel. And though his orders were clear, secure the northern trade routes, something had felt amiss. He could not explain the compulsion that had drawn him here, to this lonely monastery, perched on the edge of the wilds. As the hours passed, Alaric wandered the dim corridors, his boots echoing faintly against the cold stone. In a forgotten wing of the monastery, he found a room filled with relics, fragments of carved stone, tattered manuscripts, and tarnished chalices. A strange sense of familiarity tugged at him, though he was certain he had never been here before. It was then he saw it, a faint glimmer behind a crumbling section of wall. Drawn like a moth to flame, Alaric pried loose the loose stones, revealing a hidden niche. Within, a scroll lay wrapped in a decaying leather sheath. He pulled it free and unrolled it, his breath catching. The map was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was written in shimmering golden ink that seemed to pulse with life, its lines and symbols shifting subtly as he gazed upon them. Strange words bordered the edges, words he could not read yet somehow understood. "Put it back," came a voice, sharp and low. Alaric turned to see the abbot standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable beneath the shadows of his hood. The older man's face was lined like old parchment, his eyes piercing. "This map does not belong to you," the abbot said, stepping forward. "It belongs to no one now," Alaric countered, holding the map close. The abbot sighed, his shoulders sagging as if under an invisible weight. "It is a map to ruin. Many have sought it and all have perished. It is written in a cipher known only to a chosen few, those with the mark of the Templar." Alaric frowned. How do you know I can read it? The abbot's eyes seemed to pierce through him. Because you were meant to find it. The word stirred something deep within Alaric, something he could not name. He felt the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders, heavier than any armor. The relic it leads to? The abbot continued, his voice a near whisper. It is no ordinary treasure. It is power. Power that will test the strength of your soul. Alaric folded the map and tucked it into his tunic. Then I will be judged accordingly. The abbot's face darkened. Beware, knight. The path will call to others, and they will not be as noble as you. Trust no one. As the storm subsided, and the first light of dawn seeped into the monastery, Alaric mounted his horse and rode into the mist, the map a heavy presence against his chest. Behind him the abbot stood at the gates, watching until the night disappeared into the horizon. Under his breath, he murmured a prayer, a plea to the heavens to spare Alaric from the doom that had claimed so many before him. But the storm had only begun, and the shadows were already stirring. The rain had ceased by the time Sir Alaric reached the edge of the forest, but the weight of the map pressed against his chest like iron. He camped beneath a canopy of ancient trees, whose twisting branches blotted out the moonlight. By the flickering light of his fire, he unrolled the map once more. The golden ink shimmered as if alive, the symbols writhing under his gaze. They formed no language he knew, yet he felt their meaning deep within, as though it were written not on parchment, but on the marrow of his bones. His fingers traced the lines, a path winding through mountains and deserts, ending in a place marked only by a sunburst emblem. Around it, cryptic verses coiled like serpents, words that stirred fragments of memory long forgotten. Alaric's mind turned to his years as a novice knight, when he had sworn his oath to the Templar order. They had taught him riddles and ciphers, tests of wit as much as skill. Those lessons, buried beneath years of battle and duty, rose now to the surface. The symbols were not random, they were a code. And Alaric, though he had not realized it until now, was one of the few who could unlock it. The verses spoke in fragments. The chalice waits in the cradle of the sun. Where shadows fall, the trial begun. A heart unyielding shall bear the light, but the soul unworthy shall face the night. He murmured the words aloud, their rhythm haunting. They seemed to pulse in time with the wind that rustled the leaves above. The map's path began to shift in his mind, forming a journey not just of terrain, but of trials, of tests that would strip him bare and weigh the truth of his soul. As dawn broke, Alaric mounted his horse and pressed onward, the forest thinning into rolling hills. Yet the sense of being watched lingered. The abbot's warning echoed in his mind. The path will call to others, and they will not be as noble as you. By the time he reached the crossroads, the feeling became a certainty. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, clad in dark armor and mounted on a midnight black steed. The rider's helm obscured their face, but their presence radiated menace. "You carry something of great value," the rider said, their voice low and melodic, but sharp as a blade. Alaric's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. "It is of value only to me." A laugh, dry and bitter. "The Sunfire Chalice belongs to no man, least of all you." The rider dismounted, drawing a slender blade that gleamed like silver in the morning light. "Give me the map, and you may yet live." Alaric drew his sword, the steel singing as it left its scabbard. "If you want it, you'll have to take it." Their blades clashed, the sound ringing out across the empty hills. The rider was swift, their movements as fluid as water, but Alaric's strength and training held firm. The duel raged, each strike more desperate than the last. Finally, with a feint and a twist, Alaric disarmed the rider, their blades skittering across the ground. Before he could press the advantage, the rider removed their helm, revealing a face both fierce and beautiful. Dark eyes met his with a mixture of defiance and something else, something he could not name. "I am Celine," she said, her voice steady despite her defeat. "I do not seek the chalice for myself, but to keep it from those who would abuse its power." "Then why attack me?" Alaric demanded, his blade still poised. "Because I had to know if you were worthy of the map," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And now I see that you might be." She rose slowly, unarmed but unyielding. "The map will draw others. Some will want the chalice for glory, others for greed. Alone, you will not survive." Alaric hesitated. Her words rang true, yet he could not shake his distrust. "How do I know you won't betray me?" "You don't," Selena replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "But if we travel together, we might stand a chance." After a moment's pause, Alaric lowered his sword. "Very well. But if you try to take the map..." "You'll kill me," Celine finished with a faint smile. "I wouldn't expect less." As they set off together, the path ahead seemed darker, the hills rising like jagged teeth against the horizon. The map burned faintly beneath Alaric's tunic, a constant reminder of the trials to come, and of the danger riding at his side. The path wound through dense forests and over treacherous ridges, narrowing as if the land itself conspired to hinder their journey. Alaric and Celine rode in uneasy silence, the map a constant presence beneath Alaric's armor. Though she had offered her allegiance, Celine's every glance carried a shadow of ambiguity, a reminder of the razor-thin trust between them. It was during their second night on the road that the first sign of pursuit appeared. They had made camp in a hollow, where the firelight barely reached the canopy above. As Alaric sharpened his blade, Selena's hand darted to his wrist. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. At first, Alaric heard nothing but the crackling of flames. Then, faint and distant, came the sound, a rhythmic clatter, too steady for the wind, too deliberate for the rustling of leaves. "Riders," Selena murmured. Alaric doused the fire, plunging them into darkness. They crouched in the shadows as the noise grew louder. A convoy of horsemen moving swiftly through the night. Their torches cast flickering halos of light that illuminated grim faces and gleaming steel. "They're after the map," Selene said, her voice a whisper so soft it could have been a breath of wind. Alaric's grip tightened on his sword hilt. "They'll not take it from me." But Selene placed a hand on his arm. "Not here. They outnumber us." Reluctantly, Alaric nodded, and they slipped into the trees. Moving silently through the underbrush, they watched as the riders passed. There were 6 of them, clad in dark armor with crests that bore no allegiance Alaric recognized. Their leader, a tall figure with a helm crowned by black plumes, carried a crossbow slung across his back, a weapon that could kill from the shadows before its wielder was seen. As the riders vanished into the distance, Selene turned to Alaric. "We can't afford to be careless. The map will draw them to us, no matter how well you guard it." Alaric frowned. "Then we make for the next waypoint quickly. Let them follow if they dare." The next day, the map revealed its enigmatic nature once more. As the sun rose, Alaric unrolled it, and the golden ink shifted, showing new symbols that hadn't been there before. A path through the forest now veered sharply east, leading to a marker shaped like an eye. "What does it mean?" Selene asked, peering over his shoulder. "I don't know," Alaric admitted. "But it seems the map changes as we travel, as if it's alive. Or as if it's testing us," Selene said, her tone heavy with foreboding. Their path led to a narrow gorge, where the air grew colder and the trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked the light. Here, Alaric felt the weight of the map grow heavier, a tangible pull towards something unseen. As they entered the gorge, the ground beneath them shifted. Selene was the first to notice the trap. Stones loosened by hidden hands to tumble from above. "Move!" she cried, spurring her horse forward. The avalanche came in a roar, boulders crashing down as Alaric and Selene raced ahead. Dust and debris choked the air and Alaric's horse stumbled, sending him tumbling to the ground. He rolled to avoid the falling rocks, his sword clattering away. When the dust settled, Selene stood over him, her blade drawn. Her dark eyes scanned the ridges above, where shadowy figures moved among the rocks. "They're here," she said. Alaric retrieved his sword and climbed to his feet. The attackers descended, silent, faceless men armed with daggers and bows. They moved with precision, their attacks coordinated. Selene fought with a grace that bordered on feral, her blade a blur as it cut through the assailants. Alaric matched her ferocity, his every strike heavy with purpose. Still, the attackers came, relentless as the tide. When the last of them fell, the gorge was silent save for their ragged breathing. Blood stained the stones, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of battle. Celine wiped her blade clean on a fallen man's cloak. These weren't common mercenaries, they're trained. They'll keep coming, Alaric said grimly. As long as the map exists, there will be those who seek it. Celine met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then we need to be faster, smarter. The relic is closer now, and so are our enemies. As they left the gorge, Alaric felt the weight of the map pressing harder against his chest. The chalice was testing him already, not just through the dangers on the road, but through the choices he made. And he began to wonder, was the map leading him toward the relic, or toward his own destruction? The air grew heavier the closer they came to the edge of the known world. The map's path led them through barren wastelands where the earth was cracked and lifeless, and the horizon shimmered with an eerie golden haze. Alaric and Celine pressed forward in grim silence, their provisions dwindling, and their resolve tested by the harsh terrain. By the third day, they reached a place where the sun hung low in the sky, locked in perpetual twilight. Here, the land seemed to shift beneath their feet. What appeared to be solid ground would suddenly give way to pools of black, glassy water. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, moving without source or course. This is no ordinary place, Celine murmured as she scanned the horizon. We've crossed into something older. Alaric nodded, his hand brushing the map tucked beneath his tunic. The golden ink had grown brighter, as though feeding on the strange light around them. Unrolling it now, he saw that the path had narrowed into a single, winding line that led to a symbol shaped like an open hand, a marker that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The cradle of the sun, Alaric said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. That's where the chalice lies. Celine's gaze lingered on the map before she spoke. If we find it, there will be trials. You understand that, don't you? I've faced trials before, Alaric replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Celine shook her head. Not like these. This place. It doesn't test strength or skill. It tests who you are. As they followed the map's final path, the landscape around them began to change. The ground beneath their feet turned to smooth, golden stone, and the air grew still, as though the world itself were holding its breath. At the center of this strange realm rose a colossal structure, a temple of gleaming metal and stone, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe when looked at too closely. The entrance was a towering archway, shaped like an open hand, the same symbol from the map. As they approached, the air grew colder, and a low hum vibrated through the ground. "This is it," Alaric said, though he felt no triumph, only dread. Celine placed a hand on his arm. "Before we go in, you need to understand something. The chalice isn't just a relic, it's a mirror. It shows you who you are, in the deepest sense, and not everyone survives what they see." Alaric met her gaze, searching for answers in her dark eyes. "Have you seen it before?" "No," she admitted. "But I've heard the stories. Enough to know that the chalice will ask more of you than you think you can give." Despite her warning, Alaric stepped forward. The archway loomed above him, and as he crossed its threshold, the hum grew louder, resonating in his bones. Inside, the temple was vast and otherworldly. The walls seemed to glow with an inner light, and the air was thick with the scent of incense. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it rested the sunfire chalice. The relic was breathtaking, crafted from gold and encrusted with jewels that shimmered like captured starlight. But as Alaric approached, he felt an invisible force pressing against him, growing stronger with each step. The air around the chalice rippled, and a voice echoed in his mind. "Who are you? Alaric of the Templar Order?" The question was not spoken, but felt, as though the words had been carved into his very soul. Alaric fell to his knees, memories flooding his mind unbidden. He saw himself as a young knight, swearing his oaths, with fire in his heart. He saw the battles he had fought, the lives he had taken, and the faces of those he had failed to save. "You seek power," the voice continued. "But are you worthy to wield it?" Alaric clenched his fists, the weight of his past threatening to crush him. "I seek it not for myself," he said through gritted teeth, "but for my kingdom." The voice laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and cruel. "Lies will not shield you here. Show me your truth." The vision shifted, and Alaric saw himself holding the chalice. He saw a kingdom reborn, its people thriving under his rule. But then the image twisted. His face grew cold and hard, his hands stained with the blood of those who opposed him. "No!" Alaric shouted, pushing the vision away. "That is not who I am." The force around him subsided, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Selena knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "You passed the first trial," she said softly. "But the chalice isn't finished with you yet." Alaric looked up at the relic, its glow more intense than ever. He knew the hardest test was still to come, and the weight of it threatened to break him. Yet despite his fear, he rose to his feet. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice steady but low. Together, they stepped toward the chalice, the shadows of the temple closing in around them. The sunfire chalice shimmered on its pedestal, casting an otherworldly light that refracted across the temple walls, turning the air into a kaleidoscope of gold and crimson. Alaric and Celine stood before it, their breaths shallow, their gazes locked on the relic that had consumed their journey. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum emanating from the chalice, as though it were alive and waiting. Celine spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful and terrible." Alaric nodded, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword, as though the weight of steel might anchor him. "You said it would test me. What happens if I fail?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Failure here is not measured in death, Alaric. It's measured in what you lose of yourself." He stepped forward, drawn by an unseen force. Each step felt heavier, the air thickening around him. The closer he came, the more he felt the chalice's pull, not just on his body, but on his mind. Memories rose unbidden, sharper than they had ever been. He saw the faces of those he had killed in battle, the eyes of a boy who had begged for mercy. He saw his brother's face, twisted in pain as Alaric abandoned him to save his own life. The pedestal shimmered with heat, and a voice echoed in his mind, not the commanding tone from before, but something softer, insidious. "You could undo it all," the voice whispered. "The pain, the regret. One sip from the chalice, and the past can be rewritten." Alaric faltered, his hand hovering above the chalice. His reflection gleamed in the golden surface, but it was not the man he knew. It was a darker version of himself, his eyes hollow, his face etched with cruelty. "No," he muttered, pulling back. "The past is mine to bear." Behind him, Celine moved closer, her voice cutting through the haze. "The chalice tempts you with what you desire most, but it does not give freely. Everything it offers comes at a cost." "And what of you?" Alaric asked, his voice trembling. "Why are you here?" Celine hesitated, then stepped beside him. Her gaze was fixed on the chalice, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of longing in her eyes. "I've spent my life hunting it, not to claim its power, but to destroy it. No kingdom should wield what this relic offers. And yet, here you stand," Alaric said. "As tempted as I am." She didn't deny it. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the pedestal. The chalice pulsed in response, its light intensifying. The voice returned, louder now, filling the temple. "Two souls before me, two choices, one truth." The air around them twisted, and the walls of the temple seemed to dissolve. They were no longer in the chamber, but standing on a precipice overlooking a vast burning battlefield. Alaric's kingdom lay in ruins below, its people crying out in despair. The voice spoke again, its tone colder. "Will you take the chalice and bring salvation, Alaric? Will you become the savior your people cry out for?" Alaric clenched his fists, his heart pounding. The scene shifted, and he saw himself on a throne of gold, his kingdom flourishing under his rule. But his eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, spoke of the cost. Power had consumed him, turning his good intentions into tyranny. "No!" he shouted, the vision shattering around him. The temple reformed, and Alaric turned to Celine. "You were right. This power isn't meant to save. It's meant to corrupt." Celine nodded, her hand steady as she reached for the chalice. "Then we end it. Together." Before Alaric could respond, the chalice flared, blinding them both. The temple shook violently, its golden walls cracking and crumbling. The voice rose into a deafening roar. "You dare deny my gift? You are unworthy!" Celine gritted her teeth, her voice firm. "Power without purpose is nothing but destruction." She placed her hands on the chalice, and for a moment, the light engulfed her. Alaric lunged forward, adding his grip to hers. The chalice writhed beneath their touch, its golden surface twisting as if resisting their will. Together, they focused their strength, their shared resolve binding them against the relic's power. With a final shattering scream, the chalice imploded, its light consuming the temple. When the light faded, they found themselves outside, standing on the edge of the twilight realm. The temple was gone, its ruins swallowed by the earth. Alaric looked at Selene, their breaths heavy, their bodies weary. "What happens now?" She smiled faintly. "We live, and the chalice remains only as a story, a warning to those who would seek it." Alaric nodded, the weight in his chest finally lifting. Together they turned and began the long journey back, leaving the forbidden land behind. The sunfire chalice was no more, but the lessons it had carved into their souls would remain forever.